on you, stay inside the line.
So hi guys, I'm Loize, Antonette, I'm Clarete, and I am from BSTM 1101. So today, I will be discussing about how to eliminate risks or hazards in the workplace area or in the tourism and hospitality industry. Many people are confused between hazard and a risk. We tend to use the two interchangeably, but knowing or understanding the difference between the two can make us more effective in our workplace safety, especially in our industry, the tourism and hospitality industry. Every workplace has a safety hazard and risk, from production facilities, offices, construction sites, different workplaces, and beyond.
So what is risk and what is hazard?
Risk is a possible event that can cause harm or loss, or can also affect the ability to achieve the objectives, while hazard is a potential damage, harm, or adverse health effects on something or someone.
For example, hazard and risk is already present in traveling. When you ride a plane, it is already considered as a hazard. But when you ride a plane during a storm, that is the time that it is considered as a risk. Big waves are the common hazard in surfing. But when you decide to surf during a storm, or when you encounter a shark, that is considered as a risk.
Many threats and safety hazards are not always evident. Rather, you can only discover them once they've created a problem. How to identify and control these risks is unique to every industry. In the tourism and hospitality industry, wherein we offer service and a lot of people are involved, there is a high chance of hazards and risk. A risk is the chance that someone or something will be harmed by that hazard. To stay safe, we just need to recognize those hazards and take necessary steps to reduce our risk. That is the time when we need to undergo a risk assessment. Risk assessment is the process of evaluating risk to workers' safety and health from workplace hazard. Step 1 is to identify the hazards. One of the most important aspects of your risk assessment is to accurately identify the potential hazards in your workplace.
A good starting point is to walk around your workplace and think about any hazards. Check manufacturer's instructions or data sheets for chemicals and equipment, as they can be very helpful in explaining the hazards and putting them in their true perspective. Look back at your accident and ill health records. This often helps to identify the less obvious hazards.
Step 2 is determine who might get harmed and how. It is important to know who are the potential people who will be affected by that risk. It is important to ask your employees as well if they have seen some hazards in the workplace. They might have noticed some things that are not obvious to you, but to them, they can see it as a hazard.
For each hazard, you need to be clear about who might be harmed. It will help you identify the best way of controlling the risk. That doesn't mean listing everyone by name, but rather identifying groups of people. For example, is people working in the storeroom or passers-by.
Step 3 is to assess the risk and take action. After you have identified the risk, it is also essential that you must know the level of that risk.
risk is a part of everyday life and you are not expected to eliminate all risk. What you must do is make sure you know about the main risk and the things you need to do to manage them responsibly.
Step 4 is to record your findings.
Make a record of your significant findings, the hazards, how people might be harmed by them, and what you have in place to control those risks. And the record produced should be simple and focused on the controls.
Step 5 is to review the risk assessment. Regularly review your risk assessment. Fewer stayed same, but sooner or later, you will bring new equipment, procedures, and substance that could lead to new hazards. So using the hierarchy of hazard control, it can help you to remove or reduce the risk in your workplace. The first one is to eliminate the hazard. Remove it completely from your workplace.
For example, is repair damaged equipment. Outsource processes involving hazardous chemicals or equipment to a company set up to manage them safely.
Number 2 is to substitute the hazard. Replace it with a safer alternative.
For example, is to use a less toxic chemical instead of toxic ones. Substitute sick employees to someone who is in good condition.
Number 3 is to isolate the hazard. As much as possible, you must keep it away from the workplace.
For example, is to use ventilated rooms. Install barriers to restrict access to hazardous work areas.
Number 4, use engineering controls. Change work practice and organization.
An engineering control is a control measure that is physical in nature, including a mechanical device or a process. For example, is to use machineries. Use a trolley for moving heavy loads.
Lastly, is to use the personal protective equipment or what we call the PPE.
PPE refers to anything that employees use or wear to minimize risks to their health and safety. It limits the exposure to the harmful effects of a hazard, but only if employees wear and use the PPE correctly. These are some of the tips on how to eliminate hazards and risk, not only in hospitality and tourism, but also in other business establishments. Again, I am Loize, Antonette, and Clarete, leaving you with a quote from Pearl Zoo: sense and deal with problems in their smallest state before they grow bigger and become fatal. That is all, and thank you.
Trying to stay inside the line.